The story of London in the 1700s begins in the long shadow of catastrophe and rebirth. Only a generation earlier, in 1666, the Great Fire had torn through the medieval city, reducing churches, homes, and markets to ash. What rises in its place at the dawn of the 18th century is a city determined not merely to recover, but to redefine itself. London stands at the threshold of the modern age, vast, restless, and increasingly conscious of its own power. Geographically, the city is anchored by the River Thames, its broad, tidal waters serving as both lifeline and boundary. The river is crowded from dawn to dusk with barges, wherries, and ocean-going ships, their masts forming a forest of timber along the quays. Coal arrives from Newcastle, sugar from the Caribbean, tea from China, spices from the East Indies. The smell of the river is sharp and unmistakable, salt, rot, smoke, and commerce mingled into a single breath. Londoners curse it and depend upon it in equal measure. The physical city stretches unevenly outward. To the east lies the world of docks, warehouses, rope walks, and sailors' taverns, a place of noise, danger, and opportunity. To the west, beyond the old city walls, new districts take shape. Squares such as Bloomsbury and Soho are laid out with deliberate symmetry, their brick terraces signaling wealth, order, and aspiration. These are spaces of improvement, built for a rising class that sees London not as inheritance, but as investment. Politically, London is the beating heart of a kingdom, and increasingly an empire. Parliament sits at Westminster, its authority expanded by the events of the late 17th century. The Glorious Revolution has curtailed royal absolutism and strengthened constitutional rule. Power is no longer the sole property of the crown. It is debated, contested, and traded in chambers, coffeehouses, and clubs. Decisions made here ripple outward, shaping wars on the continent and colonies across the seas. Daily life unfolds to the rhythm of bells, carts, and human voices. Church spires dominate the skyline, many newly designed by Christopher Wren, their clean lines and domes symbols of both religious faith and civic pride. Bells mark the hours, summon the faithful, and toll for the dead often. Death is a constant presence from disease, childbirth, accidents, and crime. Yet life presses forward relentlessly, filling streets with hawkers, apprentices, servants, and laborers. The population of London swells throughout the century, surpassing 500,000 souls and continuing to climb. This growth brings energy and anxiety in equal measure. Housing strains to keep pace, sanitation lags dangerously behind, and the poor crowd into narrow courts and alleys where light struggles to reach the ground. Here, survival depends on strength, luck, and community. Fires, epidemics, and hunger remain ever-present threats. At the same time, London is a city intoxicated by ideas. Literacy expands, newspapers circulate daily, and pamphlets argue fiercely over politics, religion, and morality. Coffeehouses serve as informal parliaments of the street, where merchants, writers, and thinkers gather to exchange news and opinions. These spaces blur class lines, allowing a clerk to debate a gentleman and rumor to challenge authority. Religion remains central, yet contested. The Church of England stands as the official faith, but dissenting voices, Presbyterians, Baptists, Quakers, persist despite legal and social pressure. Faith shapes identity, loyalty, and suspicion, and religious difference can still provoke fear. London is tolerant by necessity, but uneasy in its tolerance. Underlying everything is ambition. Londoners believe, increasingly, that fortune can be made rather than inherited. Trade, finance, and speculation promise mobility, even as they create new risks. The foundations of modern capitalism are being laid in counting houses and exchanges, alongside dreams of wealth that can vanish overnight. As the sun rises over the Thames, illuminating stone bridges and crowded wharves, London reveals itself as a city in motion, unfinished, argumentative, and alive. It is no longer merely the capital of England. It is becoming the center of a global system, with all the promise and peril that such a role entails. To walk through London in the 18th century is to pass through sharply divided worlds, often separated by only a single street. Wealth and poverty exist side by side, bound together by dependence and tension. The city's social order is rigid in theory, yet constantly tested in practice by money, ambition, and chance. At the top stand the aristocracy and landed gentry, many of whom maintain townhouses for the social season. Their lives revolve around parliament, court functions, theaters, and private clubs. They shape fashion, patronize the arts, and wield influence over law and policy. Yet even among the elite, status must be defended. Debt is common, reputations fragile, and political alliances fickle. Beneath them rises a powerful middle class: merchants, bankers, lawyers, printers, and skilled tradesmen. This group is the engine of London's growth. They manage trade networks that span the globe, finance wars and expeditions, and accumulate wealth through calculation rather than title. Their homes reflect restraint and respectability, their ambitions focused on security, education, and legacy. For the majority, life is defined by labor. Apprentices rise before dawn to sweep shops and learn their trades. Dockworkers haul cargo until their bodies fail. Women work as seamstresses, laundresses, market sellers, and domestic servants, their labor essential yet undervalued. Children are set to work young, their small hands suited to tasks adults cannot perform. Survival leaves little room for sentiment. Power flows unevenly through these lives. Laws are written by and for those with property, and justice is swift and severe for the poor. Public executions draw large crowds, serving as both punishment and spectacle. Crime flourishes in the city's shadows: pickpocketing, burglary, fraud, driven by desperation as much as greed. The fear of disorder looms constantly over those in authority. Trade is London's lifeblood, but it carries moral weight. The wealth pouring into the city is inseparable from empire, conquest, and enslavement. Sugar, tobacco, and cotton enrich merchants and consumers alike, while the suffering that produces them remains largely unseen. The slave trade is openly conducted, insured, and defended in London's financial institutions, even as a growing number of voices begin to question its humanity. War is another constant presence. Throughout the century, Britain is repeatedly drawn into conflicts with European rivals. London feels these wars not only through news and taxation, but through wounded soldiers, disrupted trade, and shifting political fortunes. Victories are celebrated in print and procession. Defeats provoke anger and fear. The city's identity becomes increasingly tied to national power and military success. Cultural life flourishes amid this tension. Theaters draw large audiences, offering comedy, tragedy, and satire that reflect and mock society's contradictions. Music fills pleasure gardens, while art and literature find new patrons among the wealthy and aspiring. Writers chronicle the city's vices and virtues, turning London itself into a subject worthy of attention. Religion and morality are debated intensely. Reformers call for greater discipline and compassion, while others defend tradition and hierarchy. Charitable institutions emerge to care for the poor, the sick, and the orphaned, driven by both genuine concern and social control. London wrestles with the question of responsibility: who owes what to whom in a city of strangers? As the century advances, pressure builds. Population growth, economic inequality, and political rivalry strain the social fabric. Riots erupt periodically, fueled by hunger, resentment, or fear of change. These moments reveal how thin the veneer of order can be, and how quickly the crowd can become a force of its own. Yet London endures, adapting through conflict rather than collapsing under it. Its people learn to navigate uncertainty, balancing caution with risk. The city's contradictions, wealth and misery, liberty and control, do not resolve. They deepen, shaping a society that is complex, uneasy, and profoundly influential. By the latter half of the 18th century, London has reached a position of unprecedented dominance. It is the largest city in Europe, the financial center of a global empire, and a hub of intellectual and cultural exchange. Its streets echo with many accents, its markets stock goods from every known continent. London no longer merely reacts to history, it actively shapes it. This is the age of confidence, but also of reckoning. The institutions forged earlier in the century, banks, stock exchanges, insurance houses, now operate at immense scale. Fortunes are made and lost with alarming speed. Speculation fuels both innovation and disaster, reminding Londoners that progress carries risk. The memory of financial collapse remains fresh, tempering enthusiasm with caution. Politically, the city is deeply engaged in the great questions of the age. Debates over representation, liberty, and rights grow louder, influenced by events across the Atlantic and on the European continent. Londoners follow revolutions abroad with fascination and fear, aware that ideas can travel as swiftly as ships. The balance between authority and freedom is no longer taken for granted. Social change accelerates. Education expands, literacy spreads further, and new philosophies challenge old assumptions about class, power, and human nature. Scientific inquiry flourishes, supported by societies and salons that prize observation over tradition. The city becomes a laboratory of modern thought, testing beliefs that will reshape the world. Yet the costs of empire and industry are increasingly visible. Poverty remains widespread, and the gap between rich and poor continues to grow. Reformers call for change, pointing to the moral contradictions at the heart of London's success. Abolitionist movements gain momentum, confronting the city with the human price of its prosperity. Urban life itself is transforming. Streets are better lit, policing becomes more organized, and public spaces are reshaped to manage crowds and commerce. These improvements bring safety and order, but also surveillance and control. London learns to govern itself as a mass society, setting precedents that other cities will follow. The century closes with a sense of transition. The world London helped create is moving toward industrialization on a scale previously unimaginable. Machines, factories, and new forms of labor loom on the horizon. The rhythms of the old city, handcrafted goods, localized trades, slower communication, begin to give way to something faster and more impersonal. Looking back, the London of the 1700s stands as a turning point. It is here that the foundations of the modern metropolis are laid. Global finance, mass media, political debate, and cultural pluralism. The city's struggles and achievements ripple forward into the centuries that follow. In its crowded streets and grand halls, London learned how to contain contradictions without resolving them, how to grow powerful while remaining divided, innovative while deeply unequal. The echoes of that experiment still resonate today. To tour London in the 18th century is not merely to visit the past, but to witness the moment when a city learned to think of itself as the center of a world in motion, and in doing so, changed history forever.